it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Ghostwhispers.io by Corpse Child. Hey, you wanna dance, cat? I looked in the direction I thought her voice was coming from. Jenna was smiling at me, crooning to me. God, I'd wanted this chance for frickin' years. Yeah. I straightened up and then with a little more confidence shouted, hell yeah. I got up and walked over to her, putting on the color-coded headphones. I took her hand as she led me out to the middle of the dance floor. There I gave a thumbs up to the designated DJ to crank our music up. We got the blue DJ, the good one, so me, her, and about 3 other people were shaking and rocking out to Convict Christ and a few other techno-metal artists, while everyone else was listening to God only knew or cared what. 30 seconds. Half a minute. That's how long my little taste of heaven lasted. About 10 seconds later, I remember hearing a faint screaming noise. Actually, multiple screams would be accurate. Still, faint being the key word, which meant I easily swept it off to keep dancing with Jenna. Well, that lasted almost another 15 seconds before I noticed that everyone had stopped dancing. Everyone was now looking toward the back of the dance room, toward the hall. The music was still playing in their headphones, so I took them off to immediately be met with screams and gasps and, oh my God. Jenna had taken hers off now at this point, and I looked at her. I was about to ask if she knew anything about what the hell was going on, but the bewildered look on her face took care of that for me. She was craning her neck to look out and over the throng of people to see the hallway. I did the same, with no luck from me either. Jenna started moving closer to the crowd. I tried staying behind her, but we were quickly separated, only about a quarter of the way through the crowd. Trying to wade through the crowd was like trying to wade through an audience at a rock concert. Maybe even made all the worse here because of the apparent hysteria. Jenna! I called out, trying desperately to spot her again. I couldn't see her anywhere. A little way further through the crowd, I heard one of the girls up ahead shriek at the top of their lungs, damn near killing me right then and there of a heart attack. Right then, I was stuck between just freezing up where I was and wanting to push and fight my way further through the crowd. I was terrified of what I'd find ahead, but more so, of course, about what might have happened to Jenna. And with that, I ended up electing the latter, something far easier said than done. Oh, by luck or sheer willpower, though, I actually managed to get myself close enough to the front of the crowd to start seeing what was going on. I couldn't see much, with a lot of the taller people there standing right at the front. But I could see that someone was on the ground, twitching and twisting spasmodically. Heart racing, I managed to spot Jenna just to my right, and I went to her. Yeah, what's going on? Who is that? Her head snapped suddenly to me, wide-eyed and startled, before exchanging glances between me and the person on the ground ahead. I don't know. Her gaze returned to the guy on the floor. I could hear choked sort of gurgling noises, almost like he was trying to talk, but he was being choked while doing so. He had one hand clawing at his throat, with the other clawing at his eyes, so much so I could faintly see streams of blood running down his face. Oh my God, I think he's choking, I cried. No one moved. Here, move. And I violently shoved my way past the 2 gorillas in front of me to rush to the guy's side. As bad as he was flopping around on the ground, I had a hell of a time trying to lift him up to a sitting position so I could try giving him the Heimlich maneuver. Sir, I called to him. Sir, my name's Catherine Danvers. I'm going to give you the Heimlich maneuver, okay? Just try to hold still for me. He continued bucking wildly against me. Sir, please, I called out again. Nothing. I saw then that his headphones were still on. After a second of readjusting, I managed to pull his headphones off. "Sir, my name is..." I was cut off when his body abruptly seized, followed by him blasting out the most horrific, most startling, and just the single most unnatural scream I'd ever heard in my life, and, well, all I would ever hear. I instantly let go of him, and he dropped to the ground, stiff as a board. His scream lasted for almost a full 30 seconds, long enough for it to be forever seared into my memory. Even after he stopped, well, at least when I was pretty sure it wasn't him, the scream itself still lingered in the air like a foul smell, passing itself through everyone else gathered around as well. The guy laid now on the ground in front of me, lifeless and frozen in this weird, freakish-looking upward thrust with his back bent off the ground, stomach facing the ceiling. My own body froze as well, stuck with my knees huddled to my chest, almost in a fetal position, shaking. For a moment, time seemed to really freeze all throughout the club. Each set of eyes from the crowd was fixed on me, mouths hanging halfway to the floor. Someone finally managed to break the stupor by pulling out their phone and calling the cops. Everyone else then started filing out in an unorganized, utterly manic manner. Not me, though. I couldn't even force myself to try and make any part of me move. I couldn't even take my eyes off of the guy's body either. My eyes were fixed on his, with his staring back at me, blank and soulless. His scream, despite having died out everywhere else in the club building, continued echoing in my own head. I couldn't place it at that moment, but I knew something about it wasn't natural. Something about it was, I don't know, just wrong. I stayed in entropy like this until I was shaken back to the real world by Jenna shaking my shoulder. "Cat," she called out, rocking me gently. "Cat, you okay, babe?" My head snapped to her, then again one last time to the body, and then back to her before absently nodding yes. "Come on, let's get out of here." She helped me up, and the two of us joined the rest outside. Everyone was asking each other frantically what they all thought was going on. Jenna and I just stood waiting for the authorities to arrive. It was only another minute or so before they did. The crowd was then divided and questioned individually, but I refused to leave Jenna's side. Jenna and I were pulled to the side and asked for our side of the story. I had no idea what the hell any of the other people were saying about me, but judging from the rather suspicious looks on their faces, I could tell something was being spun against me. The both of us did our damnedest to emphasize the fact that I was only there to help the guy, that he'd been seizing even before I'd touched him. I could see, though, that this did about as much to convince them as if I just stayed silent. In either case, Jenna and I were still good to go home. I was about to walk to my car when Jenna stopped me, offering to give me a ride back with her. "There's no way I'm letting you go home by yourself after that," she declared. I'd have protested, but I'd known by that point, having already been good friends with her for at least 2 years by that time, that when she put her foot down like she was here, it wasn't wise to question or refuse unless you were willing to risk your ass being the next place her foot went. That was, admittedly, one of the reasons I wanted to be more with her. Always the more headstrong of the two of us, while I was always the more calculated one. Of course, this also meant that I'd get to bunk overnight at her place. An even bigger plus, even if neither me nor her were in any mood to fool around. The ride was silent, almost suffocatingly so. I could tell both of us wanted to say something about it, but, well, what? What really could be said other than it was the single most horrifying thing either of us had witnessed in our lives? It wasn't until we got back to her place that either one of us spoke to the other. "Hey, you okay?" she asked me. I looked at her, my face probably shaking and obviously anxious. She started toward me, and I held my hands up. "Oh, I'll be okay. It's just..." I looked down to the floor and then to the TV. My body was sort of on autopilot while my brain ran amok. Just what? My attention snapped back to her. I don't know, just so crazy. I mean, what was that? Hell, if I'd know, honey. She threw off her jacket before heading to her kitchen. I stood where I was, losing my focus to the TV again. Hey, want a cold one? She asked. Without taking my eyes away again, I replied, yeah, sure. She told me to take a load off on the couch, so I trudged over and plopped down in the center cushion. She joined me 5 seconds later with a 6-pack of Millers and a bottle of Harwood Canadian. Well, ever since we were a couple of freshman girls, it was our favorite little combo for when it was the two of us. Here, kitty cat. This'll take the edge off. I offered her a weak half-smile before taking and downing a decent swig of the Miller. For about the next minute and a half, the two of us drank in silence until, finally, having gotten herself a nice little buzz going, she looked at me and asked, Hey, still want to dance, kitty cat? I rolled my head to her. By that point I was well under, though not enough to get blacked out. A grin stretched across my face. Fuck yeah, I slurred excitedly. Look, I've got a new CD I wanted you to check out. Remember that little band we used to listen to? Seraphim, yeah? I nodded my head. Oh, how could I forget? The band that her, me, and a couple of other friends originally only listened to see if its little supposed curse was real. I even noticed she still had a few of their CDs. She pulled out her phone then and held up her music playlist to me. She pointed to one of the songs at the top of the list and said, Hey, check it. The song was titled something weird. Six Cries 6. Briefly scanning a couple of the other songs below it, I saw that they were all titled like this, all of them looking like a weird serial code or something. Yeah, this techno group called ghostwhispers.io. Cool. I continued looking at the track. The album art was a sort of sloppily drawn skeleton wearing headphones. And that was it. Yeah, you'll love it, I promise. She downed another swallow of her drink before going over and connecting her Bluetooth surround sound speakers to her phone. You ready? She hit the play button on the song. I was confused for a second when nothing happened. I looked at Jenna, who held her finger up, winking. Eventually, I began to hear it. It sounded like a low sort of rumbling noise that very, very slowly built in pitch and tempo. But imagine the stomping footsteps of an elephant approaching you. It was a lot like that if the footsteps also got higher in pitch the closer they came. Several wave-like sounds then came from the speakers that, at first, made me think the opening riff was about to cue, except it wasn't. Instead, 2 or 3 more of them passed through the room. Following this was a weird sort of heartbeat sound that, after a few more passing waves, well, the two sounds synchronized with one another. I looked at Jenna again. She had her eyes closed, bopping her neck back and forth. I couldn't understand, because not only was there no music, well, at least nothing I'd have considered music, but her head bops weren't even in rhythm with the actual sounds themselves. The rhythm stayed the same, steadily growing higher and higher in pitch, yet her bopping was much more erratic by comparison. Then, when I'd say the rhythm from the song reached about a mid-range sound, I started to notice something about the wave sounds. Or rather, I should say, sobbing sounds. I don't know how best to describe the sound other than what you'd think of if you imagine 2 or 3 whales simultaneously crying deep underwater. It was low and incoherent, and yet all the same I could somewhat feel this cloud of overwhelming sadness, as well as a sense of ominous dread coming from it. When it started getting louder and louder, so too did the bass blasting from the speakers, causing my entire body to vibrate inside and out. Jenna still wasn't bothered by this, though. I started to wonder if, somehow, we were listening to a different song altogether. Then I heard a noise like an extremely deep voice come from the speaker saying, "By man's will, the Almighty weeps." As garbled as it was, that's really only my best guess as to what I'd heard. Whatever it was, though, was immediately followed by this high-pitched squeal, sort of like a guitar trill that almost immediately broke my eardrums, literally to a point where, even to this day, I actually still have a hard time really hearing anything. I looked over to Jenna, who had her face contorted in a silent sort of scream, kind of like when you're listening to a heavy song and you react by screaming like the vocalist is. It was like that, only she was perfectly still. In fact, so was everything else. It took a second, but I actually noticed that the speakers weren't vibrating anymore, not like they were earlier. As well as this, my own body wasn't vibrating anymore, even though the bass was still blasting from the speakers. I tried to look around the room, but I couldn't move my head. Only my eyes, and even that was more of a struggle than it should have been. I noticed too that the room was turning grayscale. The LED lights Jenna had around her living room now weren't coloured or glowing. Jenna herself even looked like this. The screeching noise by now was a sort of droning ambience in the background. I started hearing more voices coming through the speakers, mixing and distorting as they came closer toward me. I couldn't make out anything they were saying, except for one thing, screamed at me in another language. Deus sumus, et flemus a te, parasitus et finiendus es. This too then dispersed into a multitude of other crying voices. They were all mixed too. Some were men's voices, some women, some of them were even children's voices. They were mixed languages too, like the one from earlier. All of them were saying different things at the same time, none of which I could understand, but whatever it was done so out of fright. I'd be almost willing to swear this carried on for hours, but as I found out only a second later, only 3 minutes had passed since this all began. Eventually the music ended, and I saw everything normally again. Came to, I saw Jenna grinning at me. So, what'd you think? Part 2. I didn't reply, and her face fell into one of concern. Kitty cat, anyone home? I didn't answer. The world felt normal again, but I still couldn't make myself move. Not even out of shock or anything either, but like something was actually holding me perfectly still. Hey, cat! She came over and started shaking me. In my mind, I could almost feel my lungs tearing from how much I was screaming out to her, but no sound actually came out. Cat, come on, baby. Catherine! I heard her voice start to jumble like the ones from the beat earlier. My name started to twist and morph into other words in her distorted voice, words I couldn't understand except for this phrase, hominum flebit, repeating over and over. Jenna began slapping me to wake up, but I couldn't even feel it, or anything for that matter. My body was essentially a vegetable, only really conscious inside my own head. I could see and hear, but not move or feel. It wasn't until long afterward that I knew that I wasn't dreaming any of this, or dead, when I watched and heard Jenna call 911, who showed up about 15 minutes later and took me to the hospital where I woke up, so to speak. During all of this, my mind was screaming, along with the other 100 million, possibly billion other voices I was hearing screaming those two words to me. When it all stopped finally at the hospital, I found Jenna asleep in the chair next to my bed, her hand holding mine gently. I moved my hand, my head to look around, and even wiggled my toes. I could move my body again. I was back. Jenna stirred awake soon after. "Well, good morning, kitty cat," she said with a groaning, sort of early morning chuckle. I looked at her, my face a mix of confusion and exhaustion. "Oh, good, you're actually moving too." "Jenna," I said groggily. "What the hell happened? Why am I here?" She scoffed dryly and replied, "I was kind of hoping you'd tell me, sugar." I just kept staring at her. You don't remember last night?" I squinted my eyes, rubbing my head, which was pounding like crazy for some reason. I don't. Look, how are you doing this morning?" Jenna and I both looked to see the doctor entering the room then. I exchanged glances between him and Jenna before answering, still groggy that I was fine. He had me then sit up and start going through all the regular checkup routines before tapping my knees with a mallet. Oh, my reflexes were fine, but when he attempted to check my hearing, something weird happened. Whenever he hit the button to trigger the beep in the headphones I was wearing, I didn't hear the beep, but instead the phrase from before. "Hominum flabit." I still raised my hand when I heard it for the first few times, but then, after about the 7th or 8th time, I felt my body go stiff again. This time, along with the abandonment of my senses, I could feel something heavy sort of stuff itself inside my head, like it was a glass jar. You know how when you eat too much, your body feels like a giant brick of lead has replaced your organs? Well, this was like that, only it was all inside my head. Nowhere else, and instead of food, instead of something tangible, it was filled with a low, deep sobbing noise from the song. Well, the pressure alone made my head prone to explode. The sounds in it got louder and louder as well, silencing the world around me. God, I couldn't take it anymore, but when I opened my mouth to scream, I couldn't make any sort of sound. I mean, not at all. Not even a whimper or gasping or wheezing. Nothing. I could barely even breathe, in fact. One of the worst parts about this was, thanks to my mind being as infested as it was, I couldn't even scream internally. What the fuck? Like I wanted to. I couldn't form any of my own thoughts. My mind was as empty as my body this time. The only sign this time that I was still alive was my sight. I could see Jenna and the doctor calling out to me and shaking me again, but now I couldn't feel or hear them. I remember being wheeled out of that room and back into the OR. Another thing that scared me about this was just how slow time seemed to move. I mean, I couldn't have been in the audiology room for any more than 10 or 20 minutes. Yet I could almost swear that I was in that room for 2 hours. The same with when they wheeled me down the hallway to the OR. That hallway stretched for a frickin' eternity, despite being only a couple of rooms away from the audiologists. In the OR, I watched figures all around me scrambling with various surgical implements. I could tell from their body language that they were all panicking, though about what exactly I couldn't really tell, except that it was to try to revive me. I must have been in critical condition, I thought. God, I'm gonna die. The whole time, all I could hear was the sobbing and crying in my head. Even my screams were silenced by them too. Imagine for a moment that you're a dummy, a wooden puppet, and you know you're a puppet, and you're forced to watch the world around you while someone else is talking for you. You want to scream out with your own voice, but you can't because you essentially have no voice of your own. That's exactly what this was, save for the fact that only I could hear the voice that wasn't mine. This time I have no idea how much time had actually passed before I came out of this spell, because it was a while before it even registered that I was actually back. A sort of delayed effect, like it all stopped, but you don't even realize it because of just how overstimulated your brain was. Eventually, though, I did come out of it, to find myself in the hospital room I was in before. I couldn't tell where I was at first, because of the way everything was happening so fast, feeling like the 9th acid trip I never had. Well, I cleaned myself up after the 8th, and it also hadn't registered to me that I'd been moved here. It was dark, the clock beside me reading 10:30 p.m. I picked my head up as much as I could and tried looking around the room. Jenna! No one answered. I was alone in the room. My head fell back down and I just stared back at the ceiling. I couldn't sleep, couldn't move, well, not much anyways. I just lay in bed and stared at the frickin' ceiling. Ironically, I felt the quiet was just as detrimental to me mentally as the voices screaming in my head were. At least with that, something was happening. God only knew what, but it was something. But now, though, I was all alone. All my thoughts were mine, sure, but that was far from consoling. All I could think was that I was starting to lose my mind, and there was no fathomable reason as to why. I don't have a history of mental illness. I've been clean from drugs, like I mentioned before, for over 3 years now. I knew that I wasn't making any of this shit up, despite how much I actually wished to God that I was. The only thing I could connect any of this shit to was that song. That made me start thinking a little bit. The song itself was called God Cries, and the track sounded like someone was crying, not to mention the words themselves that kept repeating in my head, which I was starting to realize sounded like Latin. What was said, though, well, I'd had no idea at the time. I couldn't look it up yet either, because I didn't have my phone with me. The next morning, a nurse came in and went through the routine checkup. And just like before, my reflexes were slower than they should have been, even more so than the previous day, in fact. Not to mention my body feeling even more still than before as well. Each movement of any of my muscles ate like crazy. Afterwards, though, I still asked if I could have my phone brought to me. She agreed, somewhat reluctantly for some reason, and then brought it to me. After she left, the first thing I did was to check my messages to see if Jenna may have said anything. Maybe hey, I'm worried about you. Call or text me when you get this to let me know everything's okay. Love you. Well, some shit like that. Sadly, there was no such message, or any message at all, from her. Next, I opened Google to search the meaning for the phrase homonym flabit, and the other phrases from the music. Before I even got that far, though, an article from my newsfeed caught my eye. It was a club from 2 nights ago with a headline reading, Owner of nightclub sued for soliciting illegally pirated music and the death of a patron. Curious now, I clicked on it and read the article. Apparently one of the tracks that was playing that night was done so without the artist's knowledge, and they found out because, following the incident, the police investigation revealed that the track the guy was listening to, the designated song for his color group, was that from a particular artist. Well, you probably see where this is going, but I'll tell you that it honestly shocked me the first time I saw it. The artist was ghostwhispers.io. More specifically, Rolf E. Cole, the apparent mind behind the madness. Rolf was quoted in saying that his music was more than an art, but a gift to the elder ones, and explained that because of that, he required a high price for any individual or media platform to download, use, or even listen to his music. A sign of tribute to the ones below, as he put it. Well, a bit overcompensating, I know, but art is art, I guess. Well, each to their own. The point was that the club had been playing his music despite him refusing to allow it after failing to agree to his lofty price arrangement. This compelled me to want to look further into Rolf E. Cole, and see exactly what ghostwhispers.io was actually about. After spending about 30 minutes trying to find anything about it, other than the lawsuit and the incident at the club, I finally settled on an old Facebook page from Rolf himself. Judging from the fact that the last post that had been made by the account was from all the way back in 2009, I knew that any information I'd find here would be outdated at best. Still, I was able to sift through and learn that Rolf E. Cole, to no real surprise, used to be an active Satanist and ran an old group on there known as the Whispering Ghosts from Below. Now, I'm in no way religious. I don't have anything against those that are. Your beliefs are your own. But I'll say right now that the shit I read on the old post from this guy and a few of the others in his little niche was nothing short of freaking bizarre. I really can't explain much of it, but basically, these wingnuts believed in preaching about the coming of what they called the Elder Spirit. None of them could give any consistent details on what the Elder One was, or what they did. Some gave a more or less weird spin on the story of Genesis, where others tried putting elements from Lovecraft books to create this pseudo-fan-fiction for it. Rolf E. Cole himself, however, oddly enough, didn't seem to take part in this. In fact, his philosophy was that only by speaking with the Elder One themselves could you even begin to understand what they are or what and why they do the things they do. If you're wondering just how to do that, there's actually a list he put together on how to somehow pull this off. But you're insane if you think I'm going to list it here. Suffice to say, it's a long and extremely dangerous process. And somewhere along the way, though, there was a sort of disconnect, some sort of point in time where the Whispering Ghosts drifted apart from one another, with fewer and fewer posts being made and less chat among the members. And from what I could see, there wasn't any sort of falling out between any of them, or Rolf himself, but rather just a growing apathy between them all. That is, except for Rolf, who, up until the last post made in late 2011, kept up the most and pretty much only activity throughout the group. For the most part, the posts contained mostly just drawings or descriptions, or portents, as he called them. God, a real whack job, this one. Can't stress this enough. Yeah, portents about the Elder One's rising. The drawings were, at least the best I could make of it, of something similar to those freakish, biblically accurate angels, being a giant mass of assorted eyeballs surrounded by a generated aura of some sort of energy or something. Some showed something similar to this, but instead of just a ball of eyes, the Elder One had the body of a person with the eyes embedded all across its body, with the exception of its face, which was blank. The dreams were more or less the same psychotic shit you'd expect a burgeoning cult leader to ramble on about, being all, "I've just dreamed of the almighty Elder One's awakening to hail the apocalypse," and other such shit. It was in mid-2010, when the group had really lost traction, that Rolf started talking about making music. It started with small posts, similar to the ones of his portents, where he'd describe how he'd hear and transcribe the prophecies of the Elder One. And then he'd start leaving audio tracks in posts. Finally, come the end of the year, he'd start uploading the tracks to SoundCloud and start posting links to them there. This continued right up until the last post made at the end of 2011, like I mentioned earlier. Well, at first it seemed like there was potential for Rolf to reignite interest in the group with his music, with members engaging in the posts, commenting on the tracks themselves. Well, it didn't last terribly long. The last post was Rolf saying, "The Elder One has chosen me as his prophet, and I have spoken. You have all closed your ears and your hearts to him. Do as you will, but with or without disciples of my own, I will continue his good work." I tried to click on the SoundCloud links, only to find the account and the tracks were no longer there. No surprise, I guess, considering the lawsuits. That got me wondering then, just how in the hell did the club owner have the track playing to begin with if he didn't pay for it? In that same vein, how did Jenna even hear about it? The solution? Ask the club owner himself. Part 3. That day I went through my routine checkup with no further incidents. At least none as extreme as that. The next few days progressed like this, with the only weird thing to occur being the occasional nightmare here and there, or the odd auditory hallucinations sometimes when I'd walk down the halls to the bathroom or lie in bed. Well, I still can't say whether or not it was necessarily a good thing that I'd become so desensitized to it by that point that it meant next to nothing for me to repeatedly hear hominum flebit in my ear by about 100 different people in the floor just below the Whacker Lodge, but nevertheless, I didn't make any sort of scene with it. I still had control over my body and my senses, and I guess that was enough for me. Either that or my mind has a twisted sense of humor all its own. Anyway, it was enough of a charade to swindle the doctors and nurses to deem me safe to go back home without hurting myself or anyone else just a few days following. I called Jenna that afternoon to come pick me up, as she was there a few minutes past noon. "Hey, listen, I'm sorry I haven't called," she said immediately after I got in the car. "It's okay," I replied. "I have a favor to ask you, though." She raised her eyebrows. "Can you drive us by the club?" She chuckled. "Wow, 5 days in the hospital and the first thing you think about is wanting to go dancing?" She threw her head back, laughing. I just stared at her. "Oh, shit, you're serious?" Her eyes passed rapidly back and forth between the car clock and me. "Hell, kitty cat, I don't even think the place is open. What are you even wanting to go there for, especially when it's only noon?" I opened my mouth, then stopped. To be honest, up to that point, I hadn't really thought of what to say. I just kind of thought she'd go along with it. Even if she had a point and the place probably wasn't open, it wouldn't likely be until around 10 that night at the earliest. I wasn't sure what to tell her about Ghost Whispers, I.O., the stuff that I'd found online. At the same time, I needed to talk to the club owner, see what he knew or how the hell he'd even got the track to begin with. In the end, I went with pulling out my phone and showing her the article about the lawsuit. Her first reaction was confusion, then shock, and then something of interest, giving the phone the same look she sometimes gave me when we drank together late at night. "Oh, I see. You're trying to learn more about the band, huh?" She winked and added, "Atta girl." "It's more than just that, Jen." I opened the Facebook links. The dude was nuts, and I want to know how and why they got the track illegally. She raised an eyebrow then and gave me a patronizing smile. "God, I told you you watched too many crime shows." I sighed and stared pleadingly. "Oh, come on, not the puppy eyes. You know I can't resist that." Somewhat amused, somewhat relieved she was caving, I made my eyes cartoonishly bigger and more pathetic looking. "Oh, all right," she said finally, throwing the car in gear and driving out of the hospital parking lot. We arrived at the club about 5 or 6 minutes later. Admittedly, Jenna might have had a point with the club probably not even being open because the parking lot was the most deserted that I'd ever seen it. We got out and went to the door, knocking as usual. Fortunately, Jenna always remembered the club's secret knock because I never could. It was a certain rhythm that was taught to all the paid members like Jenna and I. Sort of like a gang sign, if you will, that lets them know that you're a member. For almost 3 minutes, the two of us just stood there like a couple of the idiots we'd always hear about who didn't know the secret knock and were left standing all alone outside. She and I used to make jokes about them. Jenna turned to me, giving me a sarcastic look and said, "I told you, dum-dum," without telling me. I was actually about to try my hand at the knocking when I heard the bolt on the door slide back. We took a step back and the door soon opened. Tanner, the door guy, stood in the doorway eyeing us, wondering why the hell we'd be here so early. "Hey, the owner here?" I asked. "Yeah, but he's a bit tied up at the moment. Why?" "We need to..." Jenna cleared her throat. "Okay, I need to talk to him about the other night." He scoffed and said, "Good luck and get in line. Fuckers from the recording studios and the courthouse have been chomping away at him all morning. The way this shit's going, it's probably going to be yet another couple of nights before we can get this in order and open up again. Look, I promise it'll only take a minute. I was cut off when I heard the sound of shouting coming from down the hall. I couldn't make out much other than something about motherfucking whore. God, son of a cocksucking whore. I exchanged glances between Tanner and the hallway, and he grimaced. You, see what I mean now? He asked. Yeah, but still, I need to ask him something. His eyebrows raised in disbelief. Come on, sweetheart. You really want to go pissing the big man off after hearing that? Here, why don't you tell me and I'll give him the message. I sighed and was about to turn back when Jenna stepped up. Look, dude, she said in that same, I'm about 2 seconds from planting my foot in your ass tone that I was talking about earlier. My girl here said she needed to talk to the guy, okay? Now, you gonna let her through, or am I gonna have to lay you out like a little bitch while Cat here gets it on video for the world to see? Well, Tanner looked at her, and then to me, and back to her before stepping aside. I almost couldn't believe that actually worked. I mean, Jenna was tough, sure, but I honestly figured Tanner, built as he was, keep in mind he was also the bouncer for the place, well, that he'd be able to take her in a one-on-one. Regardless, the two of us waltzed right in toward the room at the end of the hall. Right when I reached the door, I heard a low humming sort of noise, a droning, so to speak. It was low, almost like a buzzing noise. I stopped from opening the door and instead started listening. The droning remained low for almost 3 minutes before I heard this garbled, rumbling sort of voice say something I think like, Vigilamus, sic creatio ardet. Well, a shiver passed down my back at the sound of the low-toned Latin. My arm shook, caught stuck between wanting to throw open the door and rush in and wanting to rush back to the exit. Jenna, noticing my hesitation, took charge and threw the door open for me. The both of us then froze in shock when we saw the owner of the club splayed out on the floor, seizing violently. The droning sound was deafening. I was forced to bend down and cover my ears when I heard the music let out a huge wave of synth noise, and the voice repeated, Vigilamus, sic creatio ardet. This time, though, I noticed the voice wasn't actually coming from the speakers in the room at all, but instead from the guy himself. His eyes were bugging, and his mouth was wide open, almost impossibly so. I was about to rush and try to help him when Jenna threw her arm out in front of me, stopping me. That was when, in a single motion so quick that it was startling, plus a bit painful to watch, the guy shot upright, staring right at me and Jenna, wide-eyed and slack-jawed. From there, he started jerking while disjointedly standing up. Jenna grabbed my arm and pulled us toward the door when it slammed itself shut, jamming itself in place. Jenna tried pulling and pulling, even battering against it with her shoulder, but it wouldn't budge. And the droning was now heart-stoppingly loud. God, I could feel it, like it was actually part of the air itself. It was an all-consuming force. The owner took a disjointed step forward, and the two of us stepped back in response. Damn it, it won't open, Jenna shouted above the droning. The owner's jaw distended, and the deep, distorted voice spoke. We awake, and thus creation burns. What? I asked, too confused to even properly be terrified. He took another step. With each second, his body jerked more and more, actively dislocating and relocating several of his bones simultaneously. We have been awakened after thousands of years, and we've heard the call. Creation's time has come. Now it must end, starting now, with you. Who are you? Jenna yelled. We are the elders of all creation. My eyes grew. The man stopped suddenly, doubling over in pain. I watched bright, glowing orbs of light appear all over his body, followed with him screaming in a way that resembled 100 people screaming in pain all at the same time. The orbs began to char and burn themselves into his skin like cattle brandings before revealing themselves as a multitude of eyeballs. They were all different colors and twitching anxiously all over his body. Jenna screamed, "What the?" I just froze. I couldn't feel my heart pound away in my chest. The man, the thing, whatever the hell you want to call it, took 2 more disjointed steps towards us. Jenna was back to beating on the door, shouting, "Hey, open up! Get us out of here!" "He can't save you. No one can." His arm raised and Jenna was suddenly thrown from the door into the wall. Before my brain could even register what had just happened, the man's arm raised again to the ceiling, causing a handful of the electrical cords to coil around her wrists and ankles, suspending her in the air. She struggled furiously but couldn't break herself free. I watched the prongs of the different plugs embed themselves into her arms, causing her to cry out in sharp pain. The cords started to glow bright orange and the smell of burnt matches filled the room. Plumes of smoke started to rise from the different points where the plugs were embedded into her arms. Her eyes rolled back and her body started to shake and twist. I ran to save her, but was stopped before I even made my 5th step by a rogue cord that had suddenly come to life as well, wrapping around my leg and likewise stabbing my thigh with its prongs. Immediately I felt something searing the nerves in my leg before then feeling nothing at all. I wrestled furiously, but just like with Jenna, this thing had me stuck fast and I wasn't going anywhere. I looked up to see black spots growing all across her arms and all the way up to and around her shoulders. Others were even forming up her neck. I reached out to keep trying to pull myself to her, but I couldn't move. Smoke then began coming out of her mouth and blood rained down from her eyes. "Jenna!" I screamed. I then turned to the figure, still holding its arm outstretched. "What are you doing to her?" The figure turned to face me, but didn't speak. Instead, the voice came from Jenna, whose jaw now moved up and down, all wonky like she was trying to talk while it was broken. "I told you, we are bringing creation's end. We have seen the error in its creation, and we can no longer stand for it." In seconds, the lights from the room blinked rapidly for a couple of seconds before going out completely. The room began to glow again when Jenna's body emanated a bright orange aura just like the club owner's body had done before. Her eyes were gone, with all the other ones from before now opening up across her body. Her jaw began to move again and she said, "This will suit us nicely. She is one of our strongest disciples. Thus she will be our voice to the world." She ended this with a screech that almost immediately deafened me. "Jenna!" I cried out, feebly attempting once again to wrestle my foot free from the cord. "Let her go, you son of a bitch." "We cannot. We will not. She is with us now." The eyes twitching intensified, as did the glowing around them. "She'll be the voice of life's end, the bugle of the end of days." "No, I'll do whatever you want, okay? Just give Jenna back to me." And then struggled forward again. And this made the prong sink itself deeper into my thigh. It would have hurt like hell had the electrical surge not fried all the nerves until a black patch had formed all around the muscle itself. Still, I couldn't move, even if I'd been able to rip my leg free without feeling anything. "You're of no use to us. Your mind was weak when you heard our call, but hers is strong. Only the strong can vessel us." Before I had any time to think about anything, I was yanked back by my leg and hurled into the back wall, smashing into the control panel in front of the recording room. The impact of my body, small and mousy as it was, totaled the panel itself, causing several sparks to shoot out everywhere, catching the carpet floor aflame. It only took about 5 seconds for the entire floor to turn into an inferno, and only a further 3 before the flames were going up the wall. My consciousness didn't last any longer than that, though, having cracked my head hard against the panel. I was out cold, too. No voices, no dreams, nothing. Just silence, which made me think I was finally done in until just a few moments later, at least I'm assuming only a few moments, when I was being shaken awake by Tanner and a couple of firemen. My head felt light, and when I opened my mouth to take a breath in, smoke and carbon stuffed themselves like lead weights into my lungs, and I coughed. "Oh, easy there," said one of the firefighters. He held up an oxygen mask and said, "Here, put this on." I did, and after a few seconds, I was able to breathe a bit more normally again. I looked around the room. Everything, from the floor to the ceiling, was charred. By the door was a discarded fire extinguisher and a few areas covered with foam. I looked over to where Jenna was, and I almost wanted to vomit right there and then. She was burned almost beyond recognition, having just enough of her intact for me, though probably very few others, to even realize that was or had ever been her. The plugs were still hooked permanently into her carcass. The club owner's body was likewise scorched, only he had absolutely no flesh left uncooked. A few seconds later, 2 policemen entered the room and came over to me, asking me if I was okay. I was taken out of there in a stretcher and rushed to the burn ward at the hospital. From there, I was treated as best they could for me. I ended up having the leg amputated and fitted with a prosthetic. Fortunately, I happened to have the insurance and a good bit saved up to have afforded that. Of course, that meant I couldn't go to the club anymore. Not that that mattered anymore. Jenna wouldn't be there anymore. My Jenna. She's ours now. Those words have resonated with me ever since that moment. About a week ago now. The more I think about it, the more it makes sense to me. The being, the elder ones, claimed that my mind was too weak to be used as a vessel like she and the club owner were. I was unsure of what they meant at first, until I thought back to that night at Jenna's, as well as the club before that. And that's when the dots started connecting, realizing that both Jenna, the club owner, and God knows how many others had all listened to Ghost Whispers I.O. before, none of them having suffered any sort of effects like me and the kid from the club that night had. I thought at first that it may have been something Rolf E. Coe had done in the event. Someone tried pirating the music like the club owner allegedly had. But then the thought came back to me that couldn't have been it, given that Jenna couldn't have paid the price he was asking for just to download the track that she played that night, never mind the others she probably had. That led to the conclusion that only certain people could and couldn't be affected in any such ways by the music. The only thing I could think to do was to try actually reaching out to Rolf E. Coe directly, see if he could explain any of it. But everything I've tried, emails, various phone numbers, social media outlets, have all resulted in nothing. I'm stuck on what to do now. I was finally released from the hospital to go back home 2 days ago. It didn't feel as relieving as it had the first time. My Jenna wasn't there with her snarky wit to greet me. No, it was just some random Uber guy who wouldn't shut the hell up. But it was what happened when I was leaving the hospital and on my way back to my apartment, though. Over the driver's radio, while it was on some comedic radio show, I heard the all-too-familiar droning noise in the background, the built-in pitch to overtake the audio. It was followed by a deep, garbled voice bellowing, "Hominum flabit." that one was pretty damn creepy, don't you think? I listen to a lot of strange music myself, but nothing quite as weird as that. Never had that kind of experience and hope that I never will. Another fantastic story there from Corpse Child. Nice one for us to get 2023 underway with. So, thoughts, feelings, anything else you want to say in the comments section below the video. And as ever, I'll do my best to join in the discussion. Well, my dear friends, that is it for this evening, but we'll be back very, very soon. Going to keep the longer stories going throughout the year, hopefully. I say that now, yeah, it's only just started, hasn't it? Yeah, but hopefully throughout the year. Until the next time, my dear friends, very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.